It is episode 800 of Locked On Pirates, and we're going to discuss how the Pirates have gotten to the point where they are since I started this show, the plans for the future, and so much more on this special episode of Locked On Pirates.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And it is indeed your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates, every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your home of Locked On Pirates. My name is Ethan Smith, a super fan of the Pittsburgh Pirates that has turned that super fandom into information for you and news, analysis, opinions, and reactions on the Pirates every single day. And I've done that now we're coming up on 4 years in October. And this is episode 800 of the Locked On Pirates podcast. And before we start getting into all the semantics, for starters, the gentleman sitting right next to me, well, on the screen sitting right next to me, has been a large portion of this. We jokingly talked about it that Gary's probably been about a part of at least 80 of these things. So Gary is here, obviously, on Monday. Just the stars aligned for it. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And before we continue with Pirates talk as well, the amount of changes that have gone on through this show, even since when you started coming on the show. This used to be an audio-only podcast that was 15 to 18 minutes long, had maybe one ad read, and now we're at 30 minutes on YouTube and pretty much every single podcast platform you can think of, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And it's just grown and grown and grown. And I am very thankful for that from everybody, including Gary, including all the guests I've had on the show, and everybody, my everydayers who listen all the time. So, Gary, with all that said, how are you doing this wonderful Monday morning where I definitely already thought that we were in the double digits in September, but I realized I was a day early?
I'm doing really good, man. Congratulations. You deserve the flowers for the show. It's been a lot of work for you. People don't realize all the background times that you'll shoot a text into the group like, hey, I need an idea. My goodness, I've had 4 of them this week. I'm dying. It's awesome, man. What's come of it. I think the cool thing about the Locked On Network is a lot of people will probably just say, oh, he's on a network. That's why it's lasted so long and grown. And yeah, partially. But the thing that's cool about the Locked On Network is they let all of you kind of be independent contractors, and you grow it as you grow it. You know, they'll help you, but they're not going to drive it for you. So I do like that you've done that. You should definitely be proud of yourself. And that's enough. Let's talk baseball.
Yeah, and baseball, as far as it's concerned, a lot of you I know with football being back, you may or may not have watched the games, but the Pirates had a pretty fun series, I'd say, against the Washington Nationals, a very kind of evenly played series. But more so, now that we're in year 4 of this, I'm about to be in year 5 starting next year. I thought it would be interesting to just kind of take a look at what this team has become in that time. Because when I first got here, I mean, it was Ke'Bryan Hayes, and that was pretty much it. Mitch Keller was still one of the worst pitchers in baseball as far as statistics were concerned. Ke'Bryan Hayes had the hot 2020 and was coming into 2021 looking to be guns a-blazing, and that was pretty much what they had. You started to hear rumblings about O'Neal Cruz. Brian Reynolds was also here as an all-star. So how do you think, and especially considering it's all been the same regime, that if you listened to the Pirates fan forum last week, you heard a lot of talk about that when I was on that show with Gary and Jim. It's very interesting to see what this whole product has turned into from that time, because it has mostly been the same group of guys in the front office. It's been the same coaching staff. It's been all of that stuff. So what are your thoughts on how we've gotten from point A to, I guess, point B, even though it'd probably be more like point A squared at this point with the amount of decisions that have been made?
I mean, I think we all knew it was going to be slow and steady as far as like any improvement for the first 3 or 4 years of this rebuild. That was just painfully obvious just looking at the system. It just wasn't there. There had to be work done to it. They've done a really, really good job on the pitching side of things. They've gotten enough there that you should feel pretty solid about what's returning next year, despite what you've seen the bullpen lay down on paper. I think there's a lot more that's going to come next year, mostly from returning talents that have now gotten their feet wet and maybe have more innings to give, and they're more ready to go. The offense hasn't come along, and we've been calling that out for a couple of years. We've actually been talking about the lack of prospects and the lack of picking on that side of things. It's been very, very pitching focused. So I don't know. Is Ben Cherington bad at picking up offensive players? Is he just not picking offensive players? I think there's kind of been a lot there. Henry Davis is a guy that like a lot of people have decided on already, and that's crazy to me. Like, I mean, they do it as they praise Joey Bart for being so awesome. Well, Joey Bart started this journey 6 years ago,
Yep.
and he stunk in San Francisco. And I mean, stunk. Like when they cut him, it wasn't like, oh man, what are they doing? It was like, yeah, of course they cut him. I don't know. I just think like they haven't moved as far as we'd hoped, Ethan, but they're still pointed in the right direction.
And I think that's the main caveat of all this is obviously with where they are right now on September 9th, 2024, especially with how you look at how things have turned out as far as this season specifically is concerned. I mean, even on August 9th, yeah, they were losing games, but they were still there. It was like, okay, if we go on a little win streak here, there's still a real shot we make the postseason or at least have the idea that we could be in the conversation. They're not. So wiping all that aside, though, I do think it's interesting to take into account what has been done over the last 4 years as you look at making the additions to the roster of O'Neal Cruz. I know he was added before that, but eventually matures enough into becoming who he is today, which is a absolute menace when he's at his best. And you look at just some other things that have not panned out the way you expected them to pan out. I mean, I remember when I was on this show 4 years ago talking about Mason Martin being the future at first base, and look at how that's worked out. Hasn't worked out. But at the end of the day, I think the one thing that a lot of Pirates fans can take from what we've seen this year, and obviously I'm going to have my yearly season in review where I look at every position group, you're going to find it very easy when I do that to kind of figure out what the Pirates need to do. They don't need starting pitching. They don't need middle infield help. They don't need corner outfield help all that much. They might, but we'll see. You've maybe solved your problem in center field with O'Neal Cruz. They have a very good problem that a lot of teams in baseball can't really say, and it's that their needs are clearly defined. Like, I think everybody in the Pirates scope, Gary, would pretty much tell you what the Pirates probably need to be doing this offseason. They're going to tell you what positions are needed. And truthfully, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they get there and see if they can fill them. But it's a nice problem to have at that point.
It can be a nice problem to have. It can also be a maddening problem to have because you don't have a record like they're going to put up this year, return almost that roster identically next year and expect better results. I mean, you should, because there's a lot of them that are kids and a lot of them will grow and a lot of them will play better, but that doesn't always work out, does it? Where's Jack Sawinski? Wasn't he supposed to be getting a little better this year, right? I mean, and not only was he supposed to be getting a little better, he certainly wasn't supposed to fall off the face of the earth. I mean, where's Henry Davis? Wasn't he supposed to get a little better this year? Yeah, he didn't, right? He took a little bit of a regression. Defensively, I think he's much less of a question than he is offensively at this point, right?
Yep.
So you never really know how the progression's going to go. Even Jared Jones making it right out of camp, it still kind of shocks me they let it happen. I'm still kind of amazed they allowed that to go through. I really am. I'm glad they did. but it opens up a door for next year. They might make the same decision with Bubba Chandler or Thomas Harrington, or Ashcraft or whatever. So hey, I'm happy to have that sort of thing, but it certainly has not been the kind of progression I expected, and they're locked in on a lot of it, Ethan. Like you said, the areas for growth, like first base, you kind of can't afford to not go and do something, because it's one of your rare opportunities to really, really upgrade, right?
Yep. Yeah. And it's interesting with first base and some of these other spots. You look at it too, and this is obviously something we'll talk about more in the offseason, is some of the options just aren't there. So you're going to have to get creative. You're going to have to trust your front office to get creative to figure that out. And whether you're on either side of it, some people say, "Oh, well, I don't trust him to do it." Okay, let's just see how it plays out. And I agreed with what you said earlier. The arrow is definitely pointing up still. It's not as up as we'd like it to be. I think it's kind of more like slanted, like kind of this way. It's still technically going up. We'd like it to be just straight up like this pencil, but baseball rarely ever works like that, because between now and the end of this season and then going into next year when they play in Miami again, there's going to be a lot of different conversations we're having and questions, Gary, that they're going to have to answer this offseason. But how are the Pirates going to answer them, I think, is an even bigger question. We're going to discuss that next on the Locked On Pirates podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Pirates is brought to you by FanDuel. Make sure you go to FanDuel.com right now, because you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, which is about 2 weeks from now, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And if that's not enough, FanDuel also has something special for our listeners this weekend. Be sure to check out FanDuel's Profit Boost in the app and use it for FanDuel's double your winnings for all Sunday NFL games. Just view your account page now to learn more about your boost, and visit FanDuel.com right now and download America's #1 sportsbook today. And for those of you that are sickos like me and absolutely love baseball and aren't just jumping to football right away, after you make this your first listen of the day, make sure you go to Locked On MLB and listen with Paul Francis Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, as he gets you ramped up for the postseason. That's just around the corner for baseball, and it's going to be a fun one, I think, because to me, there's no real clear winner this postseason. I don't really see a team that I'm just all that confident in pushing all the chips in to win this thing. So we'll see what happens in the MLB postseason. Also, again, thank you for always listening to this show, as you always do. Episode 800. And yet, still haven't covered a playoff game. It's okay. We'll get there eventually. And a large part of me saying that, not saying that the Pirates are going to be a playoff team this year. I did predict them to have 82 wins. I believe you were around that 83 to 84 mark, Gary, when we started earlier this year. I don't think they're getting to that. They could mathematically, but I don't think they will. And questions obviously are going to arise with this team after what happened last season, when you have the really good ending to the season with about half of what you have now. And you were kind of expecting that big jump forward. Now, a big jump forward, folks, might not sound like a lot, but 80 wins even to me would be a pretty decent jump forward after winning 76. And I think when you're talking about questions, and this arises from, again, the show I did with you and Jim last week, the first set of questions that are going to happen, folks, whether you like it or not, whether the Pirates like it or not, whether anybody in baseball likes it or not, are going to be about this coaching staff. It's just how the things are. You were in this about a month ago. You were theoretically in it last season before you lost 10 in a row to Chicago and Milwaukee. And you start kind of looking at deeper things when this happens. Like you mentioned on the fan forum, Gary, about, not seeing players hustle it out as much. And you're starting to see the body language kind of react to things that are going on here. And even Derek Shelton, who I'm talking about here, has gotten a little testy lately. And I think this is the biggest question the Pirates are going to have right away is what do you do with this coaching staff? Because something isn't working.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's really that simple of a question. What do you do with this coaching staff? I don't separate them all out anymore.
No.
I think it's really about Derek Shelton. If Derek Shelton goes, everyone under him is going to go. A lot of people love to put Donnie Kelly on some kind of pedestal, and act like he's going to survive it. But Donnie Kelly has been in lockstep with Derek Shelton this entire time. If you want like a big change, like a big enough change to upset the apple cart and replace the coaching staff, you don't want to keep any of it. I mean, like you really want it to change, right? I mean, it's going to be hard enough because Ben Cherington's going to hire a guy that Ben Cherington likes.
Yep.
I mean, I don't think he has the kind of mentality that causes a person to go out and hire someone that pushes back on them. I think that comes with maturity, but he's got a long enough track record to see that that's not what he does. That's not what he likes. And when he gets somebody like that, it's forced on him from above, and he tends to not handle that well and leave. So I don't know how that's going to shake out. Honest to God, I think he could go one direction and end up costing himself his job. Or I think he could go another way and embrace change, and we could have this thing actually take off. But Bob Nutting's not afraid to fire the coaches and whatnot. He's done it before. He'll do it again.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that when you ask one question about this offseason, like I'm asking, what do you do with this coaching staff? That does directly affect the general manager as well. And there are some people in some circles that are saying, well, get him out of here too. Well, here's the problem with that. There are a lot of decisions that he's made already that if another general manager comes in here, pretty sure those decisions that he made are going to get reversed rather quickly in some circles. And it is something where whoever Ben Cherington goes out and gets, or whoever the Pirates go and get, it directly affects his job performance. It's like, okay, now we got rid of this. You claim that your players that you've gotten in here have the talent to win. We've changed everything else. What do you do now? Like, that's more of what I think this is all going to do, is it's just going to be a domino effect of how everything is going to play out this offseason. You look at just the coaching staff alone, and different streams everywhere of what you could think about what could happen. And that's even before you think about what we were talking about earlier about how the Pirates have clear needs. Well, that new coaching staff, like it or not, is going to have some say in that, more than likely. And at the end of the day, as I mentioned, first base is a big one, but they're not going to go after Pete Alonso or any of the big fish there. So they're going to have to get creative and see what they can do with that position, as well as the bullpen. I mean, the bullpen, it's probably going to be better than it was next year, with a lot of the same names, but it's still a position that you would like to solidify. And you might end up losing the best guy in that bullpen in Aroldis Chapman and maybe have to bring him back or replace him. So there's a lot of questions, folks, that all through the offseason, if you think these shows are going to take a dip as far as emotion and as far as questions and answers, it's not going to happen, because this has, and I know I say this almost every year, Gary, this has the potential to be, actually, since I started this show, the most interesting offseason we've seen from the Pirates in a very, very long time. Because on top of the coaching stuff, you also have these questions surrounding roster moves. It's going to be interesting.
It's interesting, but a lot of it is, I think we're going to just kind of find out how many decisions they're willing to really make. Like, if you want like honest to God places they could upgrade, It's really easy for me to go around the diamond and make them. Shortstop. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa is not good enough to be a starting shortstop in this league. It's not. Nick Gonzalez is probably good enough that you definitely want to see him at second base again next year. Brian Hayes has not been good enough. If he's healthy, okay. If he's healthy and he's doing the bare minimum of what he can do with the bat, then okay, yes, you have a piece there still. Shortstop has become a hole now, though. You've created one by filling center field, right?
Yeah.
Left field, you got Reynolds. I guess statistically he's not a good defender. I don't see that, but statistically he's not a good defender. Right field, very much a question. I think De La Cruz is at least a right-handed Jack Sawinski, so maybe there's a way that you compare those two together, and because they're not going to give up on Jack Sawinski either, which is another upgrade opportunity. A team that thinks they're going to go for it, they would go out and get a right fielder. Done. Right?
Yeah.
No questions asked. First base, you wouldn't be even considering maybe that's Billy Cook. Right? Or, let's bring back Rowdy. I mean, you really want upgrade potential? I think they're there. I don't think they're going to use them.
Yeah, and it's a matter of a lot of different things. I mean, it can be as easy as you mentioned to just go around a diamond and say, hey, let's go plug in free agent A for IKF at shortstop or free agent B for Brian De La Cruz in right field. It's a lot of semantics to go into all of that. And you mentioned Billy Cook, by the way, and we'll obviously this kind of conversation will be something we talk about all through the end of the season and going into the off season. But what a weekend, Gary, it was for Billy Cook. And his arrival also goes back to something else that we discussed last week that I think the Pirates need to do because I don't understand why they're not. You'll find out what that is in just a moment. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. They have millions of parts for your MVP, and you can win every time with parts that fit your ride because passion, drive, and patience are the formula for winning championships and also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. And with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. All righty, everybody, and welcome back to the final part of today's episode of Locked On Pirates here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates, every single day, who are also playing the Miami Marlins in this homestand. So if you want to listen to that on the go, make sure you're on the SiriusXM app, search up Pirates to be able to find that. So of the big stories of this series against Washington, I think the biggest ended up being Billy Cook, who comes up here yesterday, has a solid day, had a solid weekend overall in AAA, had a 3-home run day on Friday, or 3-run homer day on Friday, a grand slam on Saturday, and then has a phenomenal debut yesterday. Billy Cook, I mean, they traded real guys to get a guy like Billy Cook and another guy like Nick York, and you continue to move that along. And it's frustrating because I'm going to go back to something you just said, Gary, earlier in the last segment. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa is not a guy that you really want to start at shortstop. Isn't there just a certain guy in AAA that, not having a great year, kind of middle of the road in there, but he's also been on the 40-man for a while, and you might want to actually get a pretty good idea of who he is. Yeah, his name is Liover Peguero. A guy that could step into that position right now, and you could get a pretty decent look at him for the rest of the year. And you're going to have to make a decision on him anyway, much like, as you've told me, you're going to have to add Nick York to the 40-man roster. So why not bring him up here and at least get a look at him and see what you might want to do with him? Because these roster decisions are going to get interesting. Billy Cook is also in this fold, folks. He had to be added to the 40-man at some point because you're not losing them in the Rule 5 draft after you gave away Quinn Priester and real players to get these guys. So why not do this? Like, it was nice yesterday to see Michael A. Taylor get his 100th home run. But why? Like, why are we playing these guys that just flat out aren't going to be here next year?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why they hold on to guys like even Grindal. I'm not really 100% sure what they're doing there right now. I still don't see the defensive upside that everyone else seems to want to paint him with. I didn't see that when he was signed. I never saw him as a defensive specialist. In fact, quite the opposite throughout the years. And so I've always been confused by the Grandal signing, usage, treatment, talk about everything that they do with Yasmani Grandal confuses me. They should be moving on from them. Nick York, I think, will be up here soon. Nick York's going to disappoint a lot of people because he's not a home run hitter. He's just not. I know a lot of you think you want a singles hitter and you think you want a Luis Arraez type, but I think when you actually have them in practice and they're side by side with all the other baseball players that aren't playing the game like that anymore, I don't think it's nearly as impressive when it's on your team. When it's playing against you, it's annoying because they're constantly on base. But every time we play Luis Arraez, how many times does he actually score? How many times does he actually drive the runs in? How many times is he the catalyst for everything that you see going on? Not very often. Because it's a guy that just gets on base every once in a while. And it's really about how the rest of the offense does. I'm not saying there's not a place for it, but the way this team is coached, I don't know how they're going to utilize Nick York. I can't tell you right now that they will successfully do it. His skill set does not match what they tend to like. I don't even know why they acquired him, bluntly. He doesn't fit in with what they like to do. So that could be Ben Cherington changing course on something like that, or thinking he needs an element that he hasn't had. But let's see what happens. I mean, like, I don't know how Derek Shelton would coach a player like that. So yeah, I'd like to see it, but I also don't think it'll matter because Derek Shelton, I don't think will be here next year. So
yeah, Well, you can always make the old joke that Nick York is here because he was a Boston Red Sox player and Ben Cherington loves that stuff. Just to go back to something Gary said earlier, yeah, when that managerial search eventually happens, look at two places, folks. Just look at Toronto and Boston and see who you like from those places, because more than likely that's what's going to happen. At the end of the day, though, with this, it's kind of just like the whole adage of, okay, well, if I'm on MLB The Show 24, right, and I'm doing a franchise with the Pirates and I see Michael A. Taylor and Yasmani Grandal and some of these guys that aren't going to be here next year, I'm benching them. I'm hitting X to bench them. There's no point. Let the other guys progress. And it's frustrating. It is. And I get with how things are right now, you can make arguments. But also with Michael A. Taylor, you moved O'Neal Cruz to center field for a reason. Kutch is on the roster and has played center field very well before in his career and can teach him anything he needs to know that Michael A. Taylor can. Yasmani Grandal, you mentioned a great name to me last week, Jason DeLay. I'd rather watch him play than Yasmani Grandal, and they're going to have to make a decision on Jason DeLay at some point too. And then just everything else, I don't know. Like, I feel like the end of this year is a lot more frustrating than the end of last year because they just did so much more positive last season with so much less. And now they're doing so much negative with so much more. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration builds up here.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree. It certainly doesn't line up. They had no business winning some of the games they won last year towards the end, and I think it kind of gave us a false impression of how good a coach Derek Shelton could be, because he had some bit players and some role players come up from the minors and patched together a pitching staff and did a good job. This year, what really enabled that hasn't worked. The bullpen has been a complete 180 from what it was last year, and the bullpen is how they pulled off that smoke and mirrors trick. So when the bullpen is just a landmine field, I don't know how you really navigate that. And I'm not doing that to take blame off Derek Shelton. I'm just saying, in this aspect, this year almost wouldn't have mattered who the manager was, because there was no good options in that bullpen. They and there were options that should have been good, Ethan. That's the thing. So a guy that I thought was completely in great shape, Oscar Marin, probably shouldn't be. That he's living on the reputation of some very top end talent pitchers that have come up here, and I'm seeing regression across the board from a lot of guys that you shouldn't be seeing it from.
Yeah, and we even discussed Marin last year about, Mitch Keller kind of saved his job. Because if Mitch Keller didn't have a good year last year, folks, Oscar Marin might already be gone. And like I said earlier with this whole coaching staff thing, that's why I say coaching staff. I don't just single out anybody anymore. I don't think you're doing good practice if you were to fire a manager or fire just a hitting coach or fire just a pitching coach. It's just all or nothing for me on that front. And these are questions, again, Gary, that they're going to have to ask themselves. And I'm sure in your 5 Thoughts at 5 today, you'll probably be touching on this somewhere. Make sure you guys check that out at steelcitypirates.com, where myself, Gary, Michael, and a bunch of people do a lot of great work over there. What else you got playing this week, Gary? Just the fan forum on Thursday. Anything else special we should know about that?
No, I think, and then you and I are going to go to a curve game on Friday.
Yes.
Hopefully we're going to catch Andy Rodriguez out there playing. So that should be fun.
And I get to see my my short king, Termar Johnson, finally play in person. I've only talked about him about 1 million times on this show, so I get to finally see him play in person. So if you guys are going to the curve game Friday, yeah, we'll be there. We'll have fun. It'll be a nice little reset for baseball. It's like, hey, we can just go and just watch some future talent potentially on this roster. But folks, thank you again for tuning into the 800th episode of Locked On Pirates here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. My name is Ethan Smith. That's Gary Morgan. I'll see you tomorrow. Gary will likely see you next Monday. But until then, see you on the flip side.